The cursor was a malevolent, blinking eye, taunting Elara with its relentless, empty rhythm. It stared back from the screen, a tiny black slit in a sea of sterile white, daring her to type something, anything, that didn't sound like a desperate plea from a woman whose last successful date involved splitting a chicken nugget Happy Meal. "Hi," she typed, her fingers clumsy on the keyboard. "I like books and not dying alone." She deleted it with a violent stab of the backspace key, groaning and letting her forehead thud against the cool surface of her laptop. The sound of creative defeat, a familiar voice announced from her doorway. "A symphony I know well." Leo stood there, leaning against the frame, a steaming mug of tea in one hand and a knowing, lopsided grin on his face. He was her constant, her anchor in the chaotic sea of her own life. They had been neighbors, then friends, then inseparable confidants for the better part of a decade. He'd seen her through bad haircuts, worse job interviews, and the great sushi incident of 2019, which they never spoke of. "It's impossible," Elara moaned, not lifting her head. "How are you supposed to distill your entire essence into 300 characters and a photo where you don't look like a startled deer? Swipe right if you enjoy breathing oxygen and paying taxes." Leo chuckled, the sound warm and rich, filling the cluttered, book-lined space of her apartment. He navigated the labyrinth of discarded art projects and open novels with practiced ease, setting the mug down beside her. "Chamomile with a drop of honey. For the nerves." He peered over her shoulder at the screen. "Let's see the damage." She slumped back in her chair, gesturing helplessly at the profile. "Behold, art historian, amateur ceramicist, prone to quoting obscure poetry when nervous. It sounds like a prescription for a very boring evening." Leo studied the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. This was his domain. Leo was a narrative designer for a successful video game studio, a master architect of worlds and character motivations. He understood story, conflict, and the perfect hook better than anyone she knew. To Elara, a dating profile was a cruel form of self-torture. To Leo, it was a character sheet. "The problem," he began, pulling up a chair and commandeering her laptop, "is that you're listing attributes. You're not telling a story. Art historian is a job. But I can tell you why Caravaggio was the original bad boy of the Baroque is a conversation starter. Amateur ceramicist is a hobby. I spend my weekends making lopsided mugs that hold coffee just as well as the perfect ones is a personality." As he spoke, his fingers flew across the keyboard, transforming her bland, factual statements into sparkling, witty vignettes. He wasn't just editing her words. He was alchemizing them, turning the lead of her self-doubt into the gold of a charming, intriguing persona. It was her, but a version polished to a high shine, the version Leo always insisted he saw. He crafted a message to a man named Ben, whose profile showed him hiking and playing guitar. Ben's opener to her had been a generic, "Hey, beautiful." "Too generic," Leo had muttered. He needs a challenge, an invitation to be better. Under Leo's guidance, Elara's reply was not a simple "hey back." It was, "That's a stunning view in your third photo. It reminds me of a Caspar David Friedrich painting, the sublime loneliness of nature. Though I hope your hike ended with a warm pub and a cold pint, not existential dread." It was perfect. It was specific, intelligent, and playful. It was a siren's call to any man with a modicum of intelligence. "There," Leo said, leaning back with a satisfied smile. "Now we wait." What Elara couldn't see, what she was blissfully, tragically oblivious to, was the cost of this perfection. As he handed back the laptop, his hand briefly brushed hers, and a jolt, sharp and sweet, shot up his arm. He watched the light from the screen reflected in her wide, grateful eyes, and his heart performed a painful, familiar acrobatic routine in his chest. He was the puppet master of her love life, meticulously carving the arrows for another man's bow, all while silently bleeding from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. He was in love with her, desperately, hopelessly, and completely. He had been for years, a slow-burning fuse that had finally reached the powder keg. But Elara saw him as part of the foundation of her life, as permanent and unshakable as the old oak tree in her childhood backyard. To risk that, to confess and see the confusion or, worse, the pity in her eyes, was a gamble with stakes too high to contemplate. So he played his part, the witty, reliable, platonic best friend, the architect of his own misery. Ben replied within minutes. His message was longer, more thoughtful, clearly rising to the challenge Leo had laid down. Elara's face lit up with a brilliance that both nourished and eviscerated Leo. He replied. Leo, he actually replied. You're a genius. She threw her arms around his neck, her scent of lemon and graphite enveloping him. He closed his eyes, memorizing the feeling, storing it away in the museum of his heart, a precious artifact of a happiness that was never truly his. It's all you, Elara, he said, his voice slightly hoarse as he gently extricated himself. I just tidied up the grammar. It was the first brick in a beautiful, towering wall that would eventually entomb him. Ben was, by all objective measures, perfect. He was a software architect with the shoulders of a rugby player and a laugh that was both genuine and infectious. On their first date, arranged and coached by Leo, he brought Elara a single, perfect sunflower because Leo had casually mentioned she loved them. On their third date, he took her to a private viewing of a minor impressionist collection at the City Museum, a suggestion Leo had planted after hearing Ben ask about her work. Leo became the silent conductor of their burgeoning symphony. He was the ghostwriter of their romance, feeding Elara lines, planning date strategies, and decoding Ben's texts. He texted, "Hope you're having a good day." Elara would say, frowning at her phone, "What does that mean? Is it low effort?" "No," Leo would explain, stretched out on her sofa, editing a game script. "It's a placeholder. It means he's thinking of you but doesn't have a witty anecdote ready. Reply with a specific, funny thing that happened to you today." It gives him a hook. He was always right. The relationship flourished under his careful, long-distance stewardship. Elara was happier than Leo had ever seen her. Her eyes sparkled. She hummed absent-mindedly, and her apartment, once a sanctuary for their shared solitude, now echoed with stories of Ben and I. Leo celebrated with her, his smile a carefully constructed mask. He'd clink glasses of wine with her, toasting to her happiness while the taste of it was like ash in his mouth. He listened to her dissect every touch, every word, every lingering look, each detail a fresh paper cut on his soul. He was living in a special kind of hell, one of his own design, where the proof of his deep understanding of her was the success of another man's courtship. The breaking point, the moment the first major crack appeared in his resolve, came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Elara was getting ready for a weekend away with Ben, her suitcase erupting all over her bed. "I'm nervous," she confessed, holding up 2 dresses. "The first trip together. It's a big step." "The blue one," Leo said automatically, not looking up from his laptop. "It brings out your eyes." "It's not the dress, Leo. What if he sees the real me? The me who leaves mugs everywhere and has intense, ill-timed conversations about mortality." Leo finally looked at her. She was bathed in the soft glow of her bedroom lamp, looking so vulnerable and beautiful it made his chest ache. "I see the real you," he screamed internally. "I see the mug hoarder, the midnight philosopher, the woman who cries at dog food commercials and laughs like a hyena when she's truly happy. I see all of you, and I love all of it. I have built a cathedral of love for you in the quiet of my heart, and you're asking me for directions to another man's shack." But he didn't say that. Instead, he closed his laptop and gave her his best, most reassuring best friend smile. "Elara, the real you, is the reason he's taking you away. He'd be an idiot not to see how incredible you are. Just be yourself. And maybe don't lead with the mortality thing until at least day 2. She laughed, the sound easing the tension in his own shoulders. "What would I do without you?" "Flounder," he said lightly. "You'd absolutely flounder." She believed him. She had no idea that he was the one drowning. The night of Elara's 6-month anniversary with Ben was the night Leo's carefully constructed world crumbled into dust. He had been invited, of course. "You're my best friend. You have to be there." Elara had insisted, her eyes shining. So he went, donning his uniform of cheerful support, a costume that was becoming increasingly threadbare. The restaurant was all soft lighting and exposed brick, the kind of place Leo would have chosen for a hypothetical, perfect date with Elara. He watched them from his seat at the table, a trio that felt like a duo with an awkward appendage. Ben's arm was slung possessively over the back of Elara's chair, his fingers idly playing with a strand of her hair. Every touch was a brand. The conversation was a special form of torture. "And then," Ben said, laughing, "she totally schooled the tour guide at the gallery last week. It was the sexiest thing I've ever seen." Elara blushed. "I just mentioned that the dating on that particular sculpture was debated by scholars." "It was amazing," Ben said, looking at her with unabashed adoration. He turned to Leo. "You're a great writer, man. But you should have her write your dialogue. She's a natural." Leo forced a smile, the muscles in his jaw tight. "She's full of surprises." The irony was a bitter pill. Ben was praising the very qualities Leo had helped highlight, the very essence of the woman he himself loved. The evening wore on, each minute a lifetime. The final blow came as they were leaving. Ben, a little tipsy on good wine, clapped Leo on the shoulder. "Seriously, Leo," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "Thank you." Leo froze. "For what?" "For all your advice." Ben grinned, pulling Elara closer. "Elara told me all about it. How you helped her with her profile, helped her with our first messages. You're the wingman of the century, dude. I owe you one." The world tilted on its axis. She had told him. It wasn't their secret anymore. It was a funny anecdote, a story about her quirky, helpful best friend. The architect had been publicly acknowledged, his blueprints displayed for the very client who was living in the house he'd built. Leo looked at Elara. She was smiling, nodding, completely unaware that she had just plunged a dagger into his heart and twisted it. "No problem," Leo heard himself say, his voice sounding distant and strange. "That's what friends are for." The car ride home was a blur. He walked into his dark, silent apartment, the cheerful facade finally shattering. He didn't cry. He just stood in the middle of the room, the silence roaring in his ears. The ghost of her laughter, the image of Ben's hand in her hair, the sound of that grateful thank you. It all played on a loop, a cacophony of his own making. He was a ghost in his own life, a curator of a love he could never have. He had used his own heart as a key to unlock a door, only to have it closed firmly in his face. The algorithm of his affection had run its course, and the result was a devastating absolute zero. In the weeks that followed, Leo began to retreat. He was the slow leak from a balloon, the gradual dimming of a star. He cited work deadlines, a fictional new project that required his full attention. His texts to Elara became shorter, less frequent. He declined invitations for movie nights, for coffee, for their long, rambling weekend walks. Elara noticed, of course. At first, she thought it was work. Then, she wondered if she'd done something wrong. Her calls went to voicemail more often, and the sound of his voice when he did pick up was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. Her relationship with Ben, meanwhile, was fine. It was pleasant, stable, and increasingly it felt hollow. The conversations, once sparked by Leo's clever insights, now often fizzled into discussions about work or mundane plans. Ben was a good man, a kind man, but being with him felt like reading a summary of a great novel instead of losing herself in the rich, textured prose. She missed the depth, the unspoken understanding, the effortless way her thoughts tangled and aligned with Leo's. The catalyst was a fight with Ben. A stupid, trivial fight about forgetting to buy more coffee. But it escalated, fueled by a frustration she couldn't quite name. "You're just so distant lately, Elara," Ben had finally exclaimed. "I'm not distant. I'm just thinking." "About what?" And in that moment, she realized the truth. She was thinking about Leo. She was always thinking about Leo. She was comparing Ben's solid, predictable love to the chaotic, intellectual, and emotional playground that was her friendship with Leo. She was comparing the destination to the journey. She ended it with Ben the next day. It was amicable, both of them knowing, on some level, that something fundamental was missing. As she walked away from his apartment, she felt a profound relief, followed by a chilling wave of clarity. The silence in her life was no longer filled with Ben's presence. It was a Leo-shaped silence. She went straight to his apartment, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't call. She just went. He opened the door after her persistent knocking, looking tired. His apartment was uncharacteristically messy, scattered with coffee mugs and storyboards. "Elara," he said, surprise and something else, wariness, flickering in his eyes. "I ended it with Ben," she blurted out, stepping inside. He just nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting it. "I'm sorry." "No, you're not," she said, her voice trembling. "And I need to know why. Why have you been avoiding me? What did I do?" Leo ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "You didn't do anything, Elara. You were just living your life." "Don't do that," she cried, frustration boiling over. "Don't give me that vague, stoic crap. I need you to talk to me. You're my best friend. You're the one who made it all happen. You crafted every message, you planned every date. You built this whole relationship, and then you just checked out." The words hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Leo looked at her, and the mask he had worn for so long finally, completely fell away. The raw, unguarded pain in his eyes was terrifying. "That's exactly why, Elara," he exploded, his voice cracking. "I built it. I built every single brick of it. I wrote his lines. I fed you your replies. I orchestrated every moment of charm and connection. I used everything I knew about you. Your fears, your hopes, the things that make you laugh, the art that moves you to tears. And I handed it all to another man on a silver platter." He was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea what that feels like? To be the ghost in your own love story? To watch the woman you love fall for someone else using your own words, your own heart?" Elara stared at him, her mouth agape. The world stopped. The air vanished from her lungs. "The woman you love." The words echoed in the sudden, profound silence. "You what?" she whispered. "I'm in love with you," he said. The confession ripped from him, raw and aching. "I have been for years, and helping you find Ben was the most exquisite form of self-torture I could have ever devised. So yes, I retreated, because watching you with him was killing me, piece by piece." Tears welled in Elara's eyes, but they weren't tears of pity or confusion. They were tears of devastating, earth-shattering clarity. Every shared laugh, every lingering look, every time he'd known exactly what she needed. It wasn't just friendship. It was love. A deep, abiding, patient love that had been there all along. The steady bass note beneath the melody of their lives. "All this time," she breathed, taking a step toward him. "All this time, I was looking for a connection, for someone who understood me, and he was right here." Leo looked away, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "Don't, Elara. Don't say things you don't mean out of guilt or—" "Look at me," she commanded, her voice soft but firm. He reluctantly met her gaze. "You think you were just crafting messages for Ben?" she said, her own tears now falling freely. "You were wrong. Every single message you wrote, every piece of advice you gave, it wasn't for him, Leo. It was for me. It was you showing me how to be confident, how to be the best version of myself. It was you communicating with me through him. It was always you." She closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "The reason it never felt quite right with Ben, the reason there was always this void, is because the man I was truly falling in love with was the one in the messages. The man who knows why I love sunflowers and Caravaggio and lopsided mugs. The man who knows me better than I know myself." She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. "It was always you." And then, Finally, after years of silence and suffering, Leo kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a conflagration, a release of years of pent-up longing and love. It was the answer to a question they had both been too afraid to ask. It was the first word of a new story, their own story, written not for anyone else, but for themselves. 1 year later, Leo stood in the same book-cluttered apartment, but it felt different now. Felt like their home. His typewriter sat on the desk next to her half-finished ceramic mug, a symbol of their merged lives. He was proofreading the manuscript of his first novel, a story about a ghostwriter who falls in love with his best friend. It was the story he had lived, the pain he had channeled into something beautiful. The door opened and Elara walked in, her cheeks flushed from the cold, a portfolio under her arm. She dropped it on the table and came straight to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and leaning into his chest with a contented sigh. "How's the book?" she asked, tilting her head back to look at him. "Almost finished," he said, kissing the top of her head. "The ending is giving me a little trouble, though." She smiled, a knowing, tender smile. "Well, the hero is a brilliant writer. I'm sure he'll figure it out." He looked down at her, at the woman who was no longer a phantom in his dreams, but a warm, breathing reality in his arms. He was no longer the architect of a love that excluded him. He was the co-author of their shared life. "I already have," he whispered, and kissed her again. The cursor on his screen blinked no more. The story was complete.